Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today for the second hour. Of course, we've seen Nikki Haley drop out of the race. Well, she's suspended, but you're seeing Robert Kennedy get on more and more and more and more ballots. That's interesting. But also, let's look at Kamala Harris. Many people were pleased to see her down in Selma. It meant so much to so many people to see her there. Uh, and she has been on black college campuses, of course. Hello, I'm a year ahead of her from Howard University. Thank you very much. Hush, Reverend Dr. Yuri. And yeah, I mean, so it means a lot when she goes to these black colleges, and she's been quite a proponent, quite the booster of black colleges, not just Howard. And that's a good thing. That having been said, it's what's interesting is how she has been used by the administration, how she has been detailed out on the tough stuff, say immigration, the border in particular. It's almost been a losing issue for everybody, and yet she got it. And many people wondered, do they like her? My goodness, why would they give her something like this, like a no-win situation? And now she's been given Gaza. And so I want to talk about that because she is, interestingly, being sent, Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church, lawyer, and from the national leadership team of Rainbow Push. I hear something in the background. Okay, everybody. And we've got Reverend Dwight McKee, the dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project. And he is also one of Cornel West's senior advisors in his presidential campaign. And Bryce Green, I've met this young man a couple of years ago. Brilliant, brilliant writer. Now he's pursuing his PhD, but I've met him as a writer for fairness and accuracy in reporting. Indeed, he testified at the United Nations. His work has been so renowned about the UN, about the Ukraine crisis, because his research has been so on point. Let's talk about what's happening with Kamala Harris and how she's being used. And let's look at, and that's happening at a time, Reverend Dr. Yuri, in which we're watching the president's unpopularity continue to surge. And in fact, the White House are now looking to put him in smaller venues. And they're going to even hire, according to this NBC report, a private company to vet people who are going to be in the audience so they can be assured that he will not meet the protesters that he's been meeting from coast to coast. It's certainly not 2020. You can't campaign from the basement. The pandemic is over, so we have been told. So what do you think about that? Indeed, in the Grio, they said that her being sent to these black events to Selma to call for a ceasefire, that this was purposeful. And indeed, administration officials are said to have watered down her Gaza speech before delivery. Now, that's not something you should make a whole lot of, because in her position, she would have to submit her speech to the national security team before she would deliver it. That's just how that goes in that particular space. But the question is, what is she saying, and why is she saying it to the people whom she's saying it to? You've got 1,000 black churches who have said, if you do not call for a ceasefire, President Biden, we will not support you. That's still the biggest organizing mechanism. It's still the biggest organization in Black America, the Black Church. And these are some of the most prominent congregations. Of course, Reverend Dr. Yuri is part of that movement. So we got to talk about that. And the Grio says it wasn't an accident that she was talking about ceasefire, that she chose the stage at Selma, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, to call for a ceasefire. She said, people in Gaza are starving. The conditions are inhumane, and our common humanity compels us to act. And she said that to applause in the audience. She continued, the Israeli government must do more to significantly increase the flow of aid. No excuses. The venue, timing, they wrote. An audience of Harris's remarks were significant. For months, polls and several protests have shown that black voters, particularly young black voters, share growing concern with the White House's stance on the Israel-Hamas war, threatening President Joe Biden's re-election chances in November. Indeed, we've seen many press reports where many young Black Americans, like many other young Americans, have said, this is my red line. What the president is not doing in Gaza. Now we have passed the 30,000 mark of those who have died. More than 10,000 children. I think a child is killed every 10 minutes there. Got a lot to talk about. And of course, let's start with you, Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary. It wasn't an accident. Yeah, you've got that sly smile on your face right now. Everyone, I want you to go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, Click the like and subscribe, and click that button that bell, so that whenever we come on live, you can hear us. am950radio.com. You can stream us there, and you can go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page. But I want you to meet my morning stars over on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, so that you can participate in the conversation. Reverend Dr. Yeary, it wasn't an accident. I mean, President Biden won't go out and say a ceasefire.
That's the part that makes me chuckle, right? That somehow or other, the thing that the president has been challenged on, he sends the vice president as his proxy to an audience that she has a relationship with to some degree. We're still very protective of her, I think, in many instances, because she has been handed the stuff that he didn't want to handle. The first part of her portfolio from the time she entered office, remember, was the border issue when we were dealing with the humanitarian crisis on the southern border. And the president didn't go down, whatever the case was. By the time he finally got there was a whole other issue. And so I think the challenge is this notion that somehow or other you're going to get representative credibility through the vice president. No, bro, that ain't how this works. At the end of the day, you're going to have to show up. And what's interesting is that, remember, these are the two folks. Remember when they were running in 2020 and the issue of busing came up, and the now vice president challenged the now president about his stance on busing. And after that debate, the next day, Joe Biden was in Chicago at the Rainbow Push Convention, in a conversation trying to change the dynamic of what appeared to be his tone deafness and his lack of credibility around issues that mattered with folks that he needs. At the end of the day, his poll numbers are bad. His policies are being challenged. He's the president. And as of all people who've been waiting to have some substantive change on voting rights, needing to make sure that we heard what his agenda was about making sure that we were going to have more complete inclusion in this plan, and not just give us the sound bites of the legislation that he's passed, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill, the this, the that. At the end of the day, there are a lot of folks who, we're going to applaud the vice president, but she's at the family table. When are you coming? Because at some point you got to show up, and it's not going to be, well, simply because you sent us a note by way of the vice president that had to be screened, before she could actually say it. It's like, look, at the end of the day, if we need to hear from you in person, not in a note, not in a press release, not in a press conference, not in some scripted interview. His challenge is he is losing, and in many ways has lost credibility, simply because he doesn't have the courage on one hand to show up. But the bigger issue is he doesn't respect the folks that got him in to show up. And that's now getting to be an offense that I don't think he's going to soon recover from.
Bryce Green, your thoughts?
Well, ever since the presidency of Joe Biden, you've seen Kamala Harris, like you say, being given the jobs that Joe Biden doesn't seem to want to handle. But this Gaza business seems to be the exact same way. I mean, at the border, Kamala was given, domain over that. But the border was never going to be solved in any way, shape, or form. The solutions to the border from both parties appear to be greater militarization, increasing the misery, and tightening the policies, and embracing even the Trump right-wing policies on the border. Giving that to Kamala Harris doesn't seem to be doing anyone any favors. And she doesn't seem to be interested in taking on bigger things. And she doesn't, to be perfectly honest, seem to be capable of taking on bigger things. Her public appearances have seen her, panned for nervous laughter, slurred speech, and going off script. It doesn't seem like she's interested in the business of actually running a country. And remember, the reason that Kamala Harris is vice president isn't because she's an exceptionally smart or capable individual. She was made vice president because she was running for president, and she didn't manage to win even her own home state. She didn't manage to get any electoral delegates. But she was made vice president because the Biden administration decided that they needed a person of color to be the face of the Biden administration. It was a purely tokenistic move, and she knows that. I mean, she doesn't seem especially capable, but she's not stupid. She knows that she's vice president because she was a compliant black woman, and this business on the Gaza border or on the bridge about Gaza, I mean, that was just another example of pretty blatant pandering to the community without even offering anything of substance. The imagery of her on the Edmund Pettus Bridge might have been powerful to people who don't really have any idea what's going on in Gaza, but to serious people, they know that her calling for a ceasefire, quote unquote, isn't really anything serious. In fact, if you look at what she said, and it was pretty manipulative what she did. She said, "We're calling for an immediate ceasefire," and then she paused for about 6 seconds while the audience applauded, and she said, "For about 6 weeks." For about 6 weeks. So that's not a ceasefire. She's calling actually for more killing. She's calling for the killing to continue in 6 weeks. She just wants the PR credibility of having called for a ceasefire. And of course, media institutions, which have been, again, another compliant part of the Biden administration's public relations policy, the media institutions have framed this as the Biden administration taking a different policy, as Kamala Harris meeting the moment by responding to public pressure. It's all nonsense and pageantry, but again, that's what her role has been from the start. So it doesn't mean much other than that the Biden administration's in trouble and they wanted a cheap gimmick. They put the black woman on the famous bridge where the famous stuff happened and call for a policy change. It's not even really a policy change. Serious people can see through that. And I think most Americans are getting more serious by the day as they're watching the bodies mount, as they're watching Israelis dancing on the graves of Gazans, as they're watching Joe Biden give weapons and give arms and bombs to these people dancing on the graves. Americans can see that, and they're not going to be fooled by a very clearly stage managed pseudo event.
Whew. Okay, Reverend Yuri, look back up, please. What you say, Reverend Yuri?
Look, I was hooked on the compliant black woman.
So he reeled you in. Okay.
At that point, the hook is set. At the end of the day,
oh my God.
that's what becomes offensive to such a significant part of the base, to do it in such a way that is so overtly blatant as to think that somehow or other black voters would not be able to see it for what it is.
But the people were hooting and cheering. I said, "Are you for real?"
Well, we gonna hoot and cheer. We come from a tradition where the mothers of the church are going to celebrate you publicly because they're not going to do anything to offend your sense of value and worth in public spaces. Mm-hmm. But then they're going to put their arm around you and say, "Baby, come here, let me talk to you." Right. And so the response to that was never going to be a public show of a lack of affirmation or affection for one of our own community. Mm-hmm. But to be able to go back and say to the one who set this thing up, at the end of the day, she's the vice president, that we know what this looks like. We've seen this movie before. And unfortunately, it plays very, very scarily of an era that puts us more in touch with the Joe Biden of old than the new Joe Biden that he pretends to be. And that's not necessarily the best look for him. And that's why he's got to get in the room with folks real soon, because the clock is ticking and he does not have much time to waste at all.
Dwight McKee?
Well, if y'all remember, they used to have a commercial on, say, give that to Mikey. Mikey eat anything. Mikey was always the sacrifice for the boys who was afraid to taste the cereal, but they was perfectly willing to give it to Mikey to see what he thought first. And last week we had this conversation about black women, black people being the sacrificial lambs for that administration. And, some folk got offended because they see them as heroes. But I was saying how that they would derive, if they won, they would derive all of the antagonism and the backlash. And if they lost, they don't get the benefits of the victory had they won. And so we end up becoming the sacrificial lambs and things. I think that has kind of been a role that Tamla has played in the administration, is those things that Biden don't want to embarrass by, are those things that Biden can't solve. I think he sends Tamala, the dream, the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe. And to go where the brave dare not go. And she goes and she makes, some majestic speech or attempt at a speech. And so he gets, if the speech goes over, he gets the benefit of the illusion of a policy change. And if the speech don't go over, she takes the hit. And people say, look how weak Kamala was on that issue. It's just consistent to who Biden is, who the administration is. I think that speech was so weak and such an insult for the same reasons that Bryce said, that she started out saying she's calling for a ceasefire, and then she sprinkled that with for 6 weeks. And, and if Israel feel like they're not threatened anymore, and if we are able to drop enough food in a parachute to feed 2 million, and on and on and on and on, so on and so on and so on. I think that, it's hard for me to protest because she seems like she's happy with being used that way. And if she's happy being used that way, who am I to contest that?
Well, a voter, and I think that, how are we to interpret this, Reverend Dr. Uri?
What's the show?
Because I guess my thing, Dwight, I've seen black men used in this way too, and I think that's where the tension with black women in that discussion last week, I think that's what that was about. We've seen too many of us, male, female, who are willing to go in and brown up imperialism and strike a blow for the empire. When that is, many people, well, come on, everybody. Dr. King didn't have a lot of friends. He was the most unpopular man in America in his lifetime. In real time, when Reverend Jackson ran for president in 1983, it was a very controversial thing, and he got 78% of the black vote. The black establishment did not support him, and they were hostile to him. And among those persons who were hostile and told you not to vote for him was Joe Biden. So let's not act like these people who have struck these blows for our freedom have been popular in real time. And so now here we are. Dr. King said we would get to a place where, people would look like us, but they would not be of us. You don't call for a ceasefire and then wait 6 beats and say for 6 weeks. Reverend Uri, what are we supposed to do with that?
Well, we're supposed to. What does Dwight say? Dwight says, what what's this thing about? I'm the
Weatherman.
floor. Look, I'm
Um,
I'm
I'm the
what do you say?
cloud.
I'm the
I'm
cloud.
not the
I'm not.
cloud. I'm not the
You're
cloud.
not the
I'm not the
cloud.
cloud. I'm weatherman. I'm
You're
not
the
the
weatherman,
cloud.
right? Right.
Hmm.
So she wasn't the cloud. She's just bringing the message, and the message is this kind of watered down, tepid posture
Hmm.
on Gaza that continues to be the official stance of the administration. The problem is that the one who is the author of the
Hmm.
policy, the president heads foreign policy. The president, not the vice president. The vice president is the representative of the president as the president sees fit, not the other way around. She doesn't get to say what she thinks. She doesn't get to say what she feels. She gets to be the message. She is the ambassador in chief of the administration as the second executive. And so for him not to come and say his own bidding, at the end of the day, tell us this is your position and stop having us kind of read between the lines and to give you the feeling that you've got some warm, fuzzy proxy love through the vice president, because there are going to be some cheers there. At the end of the day, we're not going to really tolerate this quite honestly pimping of Black folks much longer. You got us the first time, and we don't really have a whole lot to show for it. You've been able to throw some little crumbs in the direction, but not really lean into the policy changes that are going to change the racial outcomes and the racialized outcomes that we continue to see regressing. And then now when you need your butt pulled out of the fire because even your own folk are turning their back on you, here you come again. And instead of coming in your own skin with your own voice, using your own words, you want to send one of our own, because at the end of the day, you know what we're not going to do as Black people is put on a performance attacking other Black people for the entertainment of white people and white interests.
Well, I mean, Bryce Green, what does it mean that that President Biden would not come to Selma in an election year, and that he would send this proxy with this message, which was not calling for a ceasefire, which is what we are calling for? What does that say to you?
Well, it says that he's scared of showing his face. I mean, if he's not willing to go and show his face around the country, well, then there has to be a good reason for that. It's an election year, and typically, that's what you do. And you made the comment earlier that it's not, pandemic time anymore. You don't have an excuse for campaigning from your basement. And so if you're not going to go out and meet the public where they're at, you can tell that the public pressure on Biden is getting to them. At multiple events, you've seen protesters interrupt Biden's speeches, disrupt and cheer and chant. And one of the articles that you sent me before this talked about how Biden is considering hiring a company to screen people who go to his events. In other words, he has to stage manage not only his speeches, but he also has to ensure that the entire audience is stage managed. Well, something easier than that is just not showing up at all. If you don't want to bother with having an entire audience of thousands of people or hundreds of people or however many screen, then you can just send a proxy with less visibility, less clout, less authority to speak, but also a proxy that gives you, that it ticks that box that you got someone of color out stumping for you. It doesn't matter if what they say is virtually no change from the existing Biden administration line. All that matters, it's really an act of desperation. I mean, you saw what happened in Michigan. You saw all of these people turn out to vote uncommitted. You
Wait a
saw
minute.
what's been happening around the country.
In Minnesota, it was almost 20%, 19%.
And they're scared of that. They're horrified of that, because especially with the young people and minorities who see the butchery that he's condoning, that he's actively participating in. Well, you can't go out in public and continue to advocate for those policies when the public is opposed. So that's why he didn't show up. That's why he sent someone else. And that's likely why she had that line in there designed to get applause, pretending to call for a real ceasefire. But of course, that only fooled the people who aren't paying attention. Perhaps the people in the audience cheering and saying, "Oh yes, go Kamala," and maybe they weren't paying attention. because if you show up to an event like that and you're not protesting it, then I mean, you probably have a less clear-eyed view of these politicians than the rest of us.
Did you say, "Oh yes, go Kamala"? What? Oh,
Well,
someone.
but that's like passing a note. You know, this is so childish, right? So once upon a time, Santita, let's kind of role play a bit. We were in elementary school.
Did you hear what I just said?
Listen to me. Here we go. You're in elementary school, and there's a boy in the class who's taken a liking to you, and instead of walking up to you, he writes a note and gives it to your best girlfriend and says, "Do me a favor, pass Santita this note." And you read the note, and you're offended because he would pass a note rather than have a conversation. Black folks are tired of being passed the note. Stop sending folks to us with a note talking about how much you like us, how much you need us, how much you're there for us, and we don't ever see you, because we don't do virtual dating. If you're going to take us out, you got to remember what it was. If you were going to take somebody out of my father's house, you're going to have to come knock on the door. You're going to have to come introduce yourself. You're going to have to come with the presentation, and you're going to have to be real clear about what your intentions are and what time you're going to be back. And none of those things have been answered as far as the agenda. All we keep getting is, at the end of the day, you need to give me 4 more years to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm not that other guy that keeps trying to come back. At the end of the day, I don't think the degree of pain when you are really being screwed over matters. Stop trying to make it seem like somehow or other you're doing it to us should be more palatable and acceptable than somebody else do. At the end of the day, if you getting what's the name of that book? Rat F?
Oh yes.
That part.
Thank you, David Daly. Yes.
This is what it means to be rat effed in real time, and it keeps happening over and over and over again. And at the end of the day, we tired of getting screwed.
But Dwight, do we have an insult level? I mean, are people responding to what happened in Selma?
Well, some of us do, you know, some of us don't. Some of us think that any opportunity that white folk give us is a blessing, because they feel so disconnected and disrespected that they're just looking for attention and acknowledgement. But it's some other folk out here, like Yuri, like Bryce, that are saying we want substance. We don't want symbology. Give us something, give me something real, as the song says. And our expectation is that if you, in fact, are going to utilize Kamala, give us something real to say, or give her the power to make decisions that at least makes what she's talking about viable. Don't make her the superficial lamb because you're afraid to show up, and for good reason, and don't want to take the hit yourself, but you want to be seen as the hero and the good guy. And so you give her, you know, the rock to carry up the hill. And then when the rock get up the hill, then you helicopter on top of the hill, sit on the rock, and declare yourself, you know, the hero. And that's kind of the history of how these things are being played.
Bryce, what does it mean to you, or what should it mean to all of us, that the White House are now very, very concerned, and everyone can jump in on this, but first you, Bryce. They're very concerned about these large venues. They don't want any more large venues for the president. They want small venues. They want to hire a private firm to vet all of the audience members. I mean, think about that, Reverend Dr. Yuri, Dwight. Think about that. You have to be cleared before you get in there. Now, I've been in many situations, and I get how that works. But when you're campaigning for president, it's not supposed to work that way, Bryce.
Well, I honestly take it as a good sign, an encouraging sign. As an activist, and reading about activist movements throughout history, the dominant theme is of governments and people in power being completely unresponsive to the demands and the needs of the public. And organizers can get discouraged if they don't see any response. The fact that we're seeing a president of the United States cower before the public is encouraging. It means that we're doing something right. It means that there is an opportunity to at least inflict some sort of damage on the administration, to at least use some of our leverage as the public. A lot of people talk about how important it is to, vote and make your voice heard. But voting is really only a singular event that happens once every 2 years or every 4 years for the president. But what's really important is what people do in between that time. And if they are adequately putting pressure on the administration, then if the administration is scared of seeing them, well, then that should be taken as a good sign. That should be taken as encouragement for activists and organizers to keep at it, to intensify their efforts because they're being heard. Biden wouldn't run and hide if he wasn't scared about what the public and what organizers are doing. And so I do believe it's very encouraging.
Do you think this is going to force their hand to put him out here and really and have to listen to the music and dance to the music of the American public? Do you think that's what's going to happen, or will they continue to put him back in the basement?
Well, I think putting them back in the basement is one of their only options. I'm sure you remember that press conference he had trying to declare himself mentally fit, where he couldn't even figure out who the president of Egypt was. He called him the president of Mexico. Putting Biden out on center stage will only do more harm than good. Their strategy in 2020 was to have people see as less of or as little of Biden as possible. They seem to be trying to recreate that strategy. If it becomes untenable for the public to not see this guy campaign for office, if it becomes such a harm to him, well, their only options are to double down on the hiding Biden away strategy, or to put him out in public and risk torpedoing the campaign even more. So again, this shows the power that activists have. This shows the power that organizers have. Even if it feels like we're not getting anywhere, that the policy hasn't changed, their behavior is changing,
Absolutely.
Which means that our tactics are doing something.
And Bryce, you got Kamala taking the hard meetings, and you got the little Haitian spokesperson taking the hard questions. And so that's why I say he's really insulated black women, because they take the hits. If you sit and watch her do a press conference, she is her one rationalization, one justification after another. She's trying to make that nonsense make sense. So she feels the hard questions, and Kamala takes the hard meetings.
I reach a different conclusion about what this says. I hear Bryce in terms of getting the response, but a different way of ignoring the voices of the people doesn't say much, except you still scared, and then you move into being real scared, and now you're trying to find a way to cope with your fear. And you can't be afraid of the folks that you relied upon to get in the position that you are. I think if he doesn't want to do big events because they seem to be a little too much for him to handle, then have intimate conversations, have listening sessions, have conversations with real people. You don't have to do a lot of them, but when you're not doing any of them, and then when there is an opportunity to even take on the big crowd with the crowd that's supposed to be your crowd, you send the vice president with a note. And so this notion that you're going to screen folks to be able to see who's going to get in the room says really the only reason you would screen is you're afraid that dissent is going to enter the conversation. And you want to somehow stack the deck to get what's going to be an apparent approval from an audience that you've handpicked. instead of demonstrating that as the president who sits in the big chair, that you have the ability to handle tough conversations and deal with the concerns of the people that you represent, and to come away saying, I may not give you the answer that you're looking for, but I'm going to understand the question that you are asking of me, and I'm going to give you an honest perspective, instead of sending somebody to kind of say, oh, I want a ceasefire, get the applause, let's capture that, and then let's cut away the rest of it. Oh, but for 6 weeks.
What were they thinking?
They weren't.
Because this was a speech that they vetted, that they wrote. When you get to that level, this speech, there have been so many hands all over it. You know this from, before Reverend gives in his time, when he would give major policy speeches, you had a lot of people who were touching, you were vetting facts, giving ideas. Now, mind you, Reverend has his own interpretation. So when he takes off those glasses, that's it. It's absolutely, he has ownership of it. But he's already given you the guidance on where he wants to go anyway. But my point is, you don't do this. You're not a one-man band. So I get that. I get national security having to comb through the speech and all of that. But I'm just saying, in terms of realpolitik, in this election cycle, what were they thinking in saying, I declare a ceasefire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for 6 weeks? Well, are you for real?
So number one, the vice president can't declare anything.
But that's not how that landed on that audience, right?
I understand. But that means then that what you're using is the power of the manipulative tool to get apparent approval that you will not earn on your own, right? And so he's trying to figure out, here's the rule of politics. Because you're going to always have to deal with disappointing somebody, you got to figure out, as I often say, who you going to piss off.
So I'm the one.
Right. No, but and that's what he keeps saying, right? Because when you stage it that way and you don't have the gumption to come bring the message yourself, it says then that on one hand, I'm going to say, I need you. But on the other hand, I'm going to say, I really don't respect you. And I think you're too stupid enough to be able to distinguish it, because what I'm going to do is try to create this paranoia within you that if you don't vote for me, you're going to get someone who is much worse than me. And therefore, you're going to be in a poorer position than you are right now. It is the most asinine rationale, but I promise you that's the rationale. That's the only way you can come away with it, that on a stage as significant as the crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, absolutely, in Selma, Alabama, and the most important historical weekend, to miss it, and then to miss it, and then to miss it badly. You missed it by not coming, and you missed it badly by sending a message that was just so disrespectful that I'm not sure how you come back from this if you don't do what I hear Bryce. Maybe if he gets into more rooms, maybe I'll change my position, even if he does vet some people. All right, vet some people if it gets you out. But if you're coming out is only going to lead to more of the same kind of overt disrespect for the credibility of conversation and discourse that needs to be had in a presidential election, then I think you're going to see, as I heard one commentator last night say, they're fearful that the couch is going to get the most votes in some places.
Bryce, the insult level how has this landed? We're days away from this now. Do people not realize that she did not really call for a ceasefire?
I'm not certain. I know that many media headlines depicted it as her calling for a ceasefire. They said Kamala Harris calls for a ceasefire. And so that will be what the majority, or at least the majority of the people who follow and trust those media, that'll be what they believe. And so, again, like you say, it's a manipulation. And it's a manipulation that's really a display of disdain for the public, because they don't think the public is smart enough to understand what she actually said. They understand that, people have their lives and they're busy, and the world's a big, complicated place. But if she says the right words in the right sequence, maybe people will interpret them in the way we want them to. In fact, this is actually really par for the course for Kamala Harris. If you'll recall, during her presidential campaign in 2020, the 2019 to 2020, she was an advocate. If you go to her web page, she was an advocate for something called Medicare for All. Now, if you actually looked at what she meant when she said Medicare for All, it was an entirely different system than the single payer bill that was advocated by Bernie Sanders and the progressives. It was something completely different. It maintained the private system of healthcare, but she called it Medicare for All, distinguishing it from Bernie's bill or conflating it with Bernie's bill with the deliberate intent of confusing voters. So this sleight of hand is really par for the course. It's a really dirty little trick that, again, exposes how much disdain these people have for the general public. They think you're stupid. I, these people aren't stupid. They know what's going on. They know the difference between Medicare for all and increased subsidies for private health insurance. They know the difference between a ceasefire and what they're calling a humanitarian pause that will end in the fighting continuing. They know the difference between those things. They just think that you don't. They just think that the public is too stupid to figure it out. They think that the public will just go along with whatever they say because that's been the experience in the past. We don't have real accountability in this country. So every influence, every incentive is telling them to lie, to cheat, to manipulate in order to serve their real paymasters.
Dwight McKee, you have a comment?
I think Bryce and Yuri said it all.
So, so where do we go from here? Because the calls for a ceasefire, and quite frankly, I think the ask is too small. I don't think they don't just need a ceasefire. They need the two-state solution, and they need peace and justice now.
Well, forget about a two-state solution, since there ain't but one state left.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, there's only one state left. They've effectively run the Palestinians down to the river,
to the sea,
and so what's left for them to negotiate?
The pre-1967 borders.
Then you have to move all those the hundreds of thousands of settlers out.
Yeah.
That are there now, who all of them have guns, and if you cross that fence, it justifies them shooting you or shooting at you. We need to stop playing games with this.
No. So my question is, what is the answer? Is there one?
No. It not one. There's not one that does not require the total reversal of the policies from 1947 on. You would have to take the existing settlers and take them back to the borders of 1947 and split the land in half. Right now, the Palestinians control, the Zionists control 85% of the land. They actually control all of the land, but they are settled on 85% of the land. And so unless the world is willing, particularly the United States, to have the settlers pack up and go back from whence they came, there can never be a two-state solution, in my opinion.
Reverend Dr. Yuri, we're in this 2024 cycle. What is next? Because to me, when I saw the speech and when I saw that, I said, here we go again. Do we not have an insult level? I got that from my parents, an insult level. How are you going to come here and say this to me? And you're not calling for a ceasefire. That is what I'm demanding of you. I have told you through my churches, through my pastors, because it is the congregation who are pushing these pastors, pushing y'all to meet with the president and say, hey, if you do not support a ceasefire, I'm not supporting you. And then she comes to some and says this, and she's speaking for the administration. That is so insulting to me, Reverend Yuri. It's an insult.
It is an insult. It is clearly an insult. And it's not the first time we've experienced insult from the president. The question becomes, what's our response? And there's one response that we have now, and there's one response that has to wait until later, right? They're still going through the primaries. The fix is in. We know he's going to get the nomination. And so we're looking at the general election. But we have to continue to raise the issue until there's not just a speech about it, that there is official policy pressure to bring it about. At the end of the day, making the demand is different than getting the end result, because the ceasefire has to be agreed upon amongst the parties. And there's that. So, but the president has to be clear about what the US's posture is, because we're fueling and funding this, right? On one hand, we've got money's going to wars. We've got money's going to house a migrant crisis that is ever expanding and putting pressures on urban cities, where very often you have overrepresentation of peoples of color when compared to suburbs. There's now resource capacity that's being stretched. There are legitimate concerns about where do I fit within this grand scheme of the American policy infrastructure. And if just the dignity of Black folks knowing what it feels like to be put upon, that causes Black pastors. Think about it. Black pastors didn't say, we're going to question our support of you around voting rights, around police reform, around economic empowerment. We staked our claim on common humanity writ large. And that if you can't do something as take a position as obvious as what we see going on in Gaza, then everything else that we could ask for is obviously going to be of no consequence, because this is the obvious thing. This should be the easy thing to take a position on. And if you won't take a position on this, I know you won't deal with the things that are going to require a little more muster, a little more courage, a little more creativity, simply because it's much more complicated. That's the problem here, is that he's making this a single issue. I'll give you this. The quid pro quo is not, I call for a ceasefire and I win you over. That's not what that is. It is, we're demanding the ceasefire because that's what common humanity and human decency requires in this moment. And, oh, by the way, once you do that, you still got to deal with all the rest of this. And at this point, your report card ain't looking real good. Not only are you not going to make the dean's list, you're going to come away on academic political probation in short order, and it's going to be problematic for the administration.
Dwight, I have a couple of minutes for you, and then a couple for Bryce before we go. Dwight?
You got a question?
Yeah, I mean, just wrap things up.
Well, I think both Yuri and Bryce have wrapped things up sufficiently. I think that, anything else I say will be redundant. I think that many of us have enough sense to know when we're trying to be played. I think a lot of us are tired of being played. I think that explains those 100,000 no commitment votes that came out of Michigan. And I think that, Biden is willing to play that. I think that he sent a signal last night when he told Haley's crowd that there's room for them at his cross. And he started to play to the right already, hoping that that white conservative crowd will come to his side, because his policies more and his beliefs more represent them than the progressives and the liberals that put him in power in the first place. And he's willing to write us off to pacify them. And that's the story of Biden and the administration, as it has been for the Democrats for the last 50 years since Johnson.
Always has been. Bryce, the last 2 minutes belong to you.
I would just say that I'll just reiterate what I said about this moment giving me a little bit of hope. We know that the Biden administration is responding to the pressure in some way, so we know that activism has some effect. As for this being the bare minimum, a ceasefire, I totally agree. The call has to be and should always be end U.S. You can say that it'll end in 1 state or 2 states or 3 states. what have you. I mean, that's not really for us to decide as Americans. That's for the Palestinians to decide, and they will decide it. The only thing we have to do is to bring the situation about so that they can decide it. And to do that, that means first and foremost ending U.S. support for Israel. That should be the rallying cry for everyone with who's alive to the problems and who's clear-eyed about what we need to do.
Well, everybody get registered, vote, and participate. I do not believe this is a zero-sum game. I think that everybody can win, and I do take hope. I am excited about the fact that people power, it is moving this administration. We're seeing the power of uncommitted, Reverend Dr. Uri. They got 13% in Michigan. Now they're up to almost 20% in Minnesota, right here at AM 950 Radio, the home of this station. And it is making a difference. Well, do we have more work to do? Yes, that's going to make us work harder. It's going to make us work smarter. I don't have a problem with that. But people are moving the needle, which means you have to continue to press toward the mark. No one else should die over there. No one. This is inhumane. It is wrong. And
I see it a little differently. I think
Dwight, I got 30 seconds, hon, and I got to get out of here. What?
I think they're still playing games. I don't think the needle is moving at all. I think that they are still playing games.
No, but Dwight, I do agree with that. I do believe that they're still playing games, but I also believe that they are responding to pressure. And I think that means we need to press even more. Of course, they're playing games. They're going to do that. Power is going to protect itself. I appreciate that. But what I also understand is that we are from the space where we inspire people to get moving, to know that they have the power to change things. And I'm not going to move from that. And you all can change things, but you're going to have to work even harder every single day. The revolution will not be televised. You must press toward the mark. You must make things happen. No one is going to hand your freedom to you. No one's going to hand justice to you. You must fight for it every single day. The price of your liberty is your eternal vigilance. You must do it. So you've got to make things happen. I'm Santita Jackson. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio. Please keep it locked right here on Minnesota's progressive radio station, this progressive voice. Sending all my love to all of you, and congratulations on that 19% for uncommitted. Let's keep on pushing. Let's keep on pushing. Let's keep on pressing. I'm Santita Jackson. God bless you.